Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session, which is a session built around energy efficiency and how we can deal with energy efficiency in buildings and low-hanging fruit. I'm Mervyn Pilley. I'm the director of ESTA, Energy Services and Technology Association. Very pleased to be chairing today's session. Very brief introduction from myself. The purpose of creating a special interest group, a joint interest group between ourselves and BESA, was very much built around the need to explore where we can go with energy efficiency in buildings. It's a very important topic, especially in relation to commercial buildings. The sessions are composed of experts from both BESA and ESTA, meeting as frequently as possible to discuss technical issues, shared challenges, looking to explore maximising energy efficiency and looking at all the new solutions as they enter the marketplace. The aim of the group is to look to publish through thought leadership work, standards, get involved with the standard setting, and ultimately hoping to feed into government policy. Very welcome today to all the panelists who've joined me to sit on the panel. We're quite tight for time. We've got half an hour, which is not a lot of time to discuss such an important subject, such an all-encompassing subject. So what I'd like to do is just introduce each panel member in turn. And if you can just briefly introduce yourself, just explain your view on energy efficiency in buildings, where the low-hanging fruit could be, and what you briefly think we could take an action on as soon as possible, bearing in mind what's going on at the moment in relation to COP and all the other activity. And then we'll have hopefully about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A and a wind up. So I'm going to take it on screen order. So George, if I can introduce you, and if you'd like to just take the floor for perhaps 3 to 5 minutes.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Mervyn. Hi, George Barnes here, Chair of the Independent Energy Consultants Group of ESTA and Vice Chair of our Joint Energy Efficiency and Building Group. So for me, I think generally at the moment there's a limited focus on energy efficiency. I think we'll all be in agreement there, especially away from non-SMEs. So, non-SMEs focus through the resource energy efficiency, energy savings opportunity scheme. But I feel that the focus for SMEs is quite lacking, especially around cohesive behaviour change, where I feel it has got the most potential for low-hanging fruit, really, through cohesive energy management systems such as ISO 50001. Uptake for ISO 50001 has been relatively low in the UK, partly, I think, through lack of incentivisation, whereas incentivisation through tax breaks, for example, in Germany, means that they've got over 50% of the ISO certified energy management systems globally. I think also there's been a lack of focus recently on energy efficiency on two quite important strategy documents. So we've had the heat and buildings strategy document and the net zero strategy document. Both, again, limited view on efficiency pieces, much more focused towards alternative sources of energy generation. And I think that's missing a big trick there, personally. Some of the downsides there, I think, as well, with switch to alternative fuels, just getting on my soapbox here a bit, I think there's quite a few unintended consequences, which I'm a little worried about. I think there's a big elephant in the room about the state of our electricity grid to cope with the increased demand from increased heat pumps and increased electric vehicles. I don't think that's been addressed properly. I think we need to focus heavily on energy efficiency to reduce that risk of reinforcement on the grid or in fact failure. And I think that there's quite a long way to go to do so. I also think that with the move of levies from electricity to gas, there may be other unintended consequences there on knocking up energy prices and focusing and pushing the emphasis onto cheaper fuels such as coal. And I feel that we need to shift away from this focus on alternative fuels, which is great in the long run, and have much more emphasis on the low-hanging fruit and energy efficiency in the short to medium term. So in conclusion, for my short introduction, I think there is some good stuff being done at business level, but mostly driven by businesses and the market. I don't think there's enough intervention from the government or support for energy efficiency measures. And I worry that once the Pareto law has been achieved, we've hit those 80% big hitters. I feel that the final 20% energy reductions and net zero associated emissions are going to be extremely difficult to tackle without further government support. So that's me,
Thanks, George.
and
Thanks,
I'll
George.
pass the
Yeah,
buck.
marvelous. Thanks, George. Yeah, perhaps I can go to Rob next. You're my next image on the screen, Rob. I know you've got a big focus on buildings through your work that you do. So yes, if you'd like to take the floor, please.
Thank you, and thanks for the introduction. I sit on the IET Environment Executive Panel, as well as being employed in the industry and a controls manufacturer. And to sort of counterpoint to the last speaker, I'd like to sort of be a bit more optimistic, really, about things, because there's a huge, obviously, focus on decarbonisation, and that's really the big piece as we gear up to achieve net zero. And there's a lot of technology that's already out there that's not getting utilised as it should be, either not being used at all or not being used with the correct commissioning and application. And the main focus, obviously, is getting away from fossil fuels, and absolutely we need to do that. But the key to enabling that is really flexibility. And it's unfortunate that last year the grid spent £250 million turning off renewable sources. And if we could have a flexible building system where we utilise that renewable electricity when it's plentiful, and throttle back on mains connection when it's more expensive and dirtier, will be a long way further forward to decarbonising. And a lot of these technologies are mature, they're already developed, they already exist. My key area is heating control. And what we found is that most buildings are still run kind of using 20 years old technology. And just by some simple changes to the control strategy and to the operational settings, simple things like system balancing, system optimization, using the best-in-class technologies, 30% energy consumption reduction is very, very possible. And even with changing something out like a thermostat, you can save 10% very, very easily. And it's these quick wins, these low-hanging fruit, whatever you want to keep cheesy buzzword you want to use. Those are the things that we can take action on, you know. There's lots and lots of talk, lots of papers being written, you know, the heat and building strategy, all these guys up in Glasgow talking about the future. As engineers, we need to act on today's challenges using today's technology, and working with all stakeholders, with the manufacturers, with the government, but critically with the installers and consumers, to get them bought into it so that they can utilise the technology that's there in the most efficient way to avoid waste and naturally to reduce carbon.
Thanks, Rob. That's interesting, and it's good to balance up some optimism with some cynicism. It's that time, I think, when we've got to make those decisions. Great. Okay, thanks a lot. And over to you, Ian, please, for your thoughts and where you think we are in terms of efficiency and buildings.
Hi there, yeah, thanks for that, Mervyn. So I'm Ian Fisher, I'm Technical Director at Mattair, but I'm also a TM44 assessor, which looks at air conditioning efficiency in buildings, and I've been doing it now for over 12 years, and what I'm tending to find is that I'm doing repeat buildings now, and when I go back, they've got the exact same problems as what they had 5 years ago. So that brings me on to some low-hanging fruit, is that a lot of building owners and operators need to engage more with the maintenance providers and listen to what they're saying and look at look what options they've got for optimising the equipment that's there. The other thing that I think's for low-hanging fruit, or to get people more engaged, is for some kind of register where people monitor energy in the building, and they could look at building types, and they could see how their building compares to another building what's similar. I know every building is different, but if they're country mile apart, you know you've got to do something. And then cutting right back to the low-hanging fruit, I think it really starts right at the basics, and that's making sure that things are maintained correctly and everything's clean and working as it should. The other thing that needs to be looked at, I think, which is a low-hanging fruit, what's overlooked, is seasonal commissioning. So people can go in there and have a look at the set points, make sure they're set right. They can have a look, make sure that no equipment's set to conflict. So you haven't got your heating or your air handler set at 23 degrees when you've got your air conditioning set at 21 or 22 cooling, so they can conflict. So it's just making sure that everything's running as it should and it's working as clean as it can be, because ultimately net zero is about operational carbon, getting the buildings to use as little energy as possible. And you can put the best technology in there, but if it's not well maintained and set to run correctly, you'll never get it. So, and just one more thing for the low-hanging fruit is I really think that engineers, you ought to look outside of their discipline when they're maintaining a building. For example, the heating engineer, you could have a look at the air conditioning set points or even see if it's running when the heating is. The ventilation engineer, who's looking at the air handlers, he can look at the heating and the cooling, make sure that the valves are working. So I think when it cuts down to it, we just need to get back to basics at the beginning. That's it from me. Thank you.
That's fine, Ian. It's good to always hear people saying, let's get back to basics, because I think everyone's getting into some fantasy areas of policy and thoughts at the minute. So it's really good to hear that message. Great. Thanks, Ian. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you. Good morning. Chris Coath, Director of Energy and Asset Management for NG Bailey. My focus really is in the FM sector, so working with our facilities management teams to look at how we can optimise our customers' buildings, make sure they're working as efficiently as possible, and recognising the fact that it's our engineers on the ground that have our hands on the assets and in front of those assets and have the ability to influence change. But I think the challenge of improving building efficiency and delivering the promise of these buildings is quite complicated and it's wide-reaching, and I think many customers really struggle to break this big challenge down into very, very simple steps. But I think it can be, but it does require some change in approaches. So I think the first thing is to really kind of focus on building operation and make FM teams and businesses responsible and accountable for how a building performs. You know, like I said, they've got the engineers on the ground. They're the guys in charge of the set points. They're the guys in charge of the time schedules for a BMS system. They're the guys that can really drive performance. I think accountability is key. And I think then it's about advancing our maintenance model. What can we do differently? SFG20 is a great way of maintaining a building. You know, it maintains the lifespan of that asset. But actually, are we utilising our engineering force in the right way and the most effective way to drive performance? And in many cases, I don't think we are. And the last thing to add there is really about measurement, reporting and KPIs. We still don't see a huge number of customers holding FM companies to account through KPI metrics in terms of building performance. They really should do. We should be all measuring the building performance. And if that building performance is drifting, well, ultimately, we should be pushing the FM company to address that. So I think that's my piece around building operation. The next piece is asset management. So, you know, really simply, what assets have we got in our portfolio? Which assets are in a building? How old are those assets? What condition they are? Which ones need to be electrified? And when do they need to be upgraded and replaced? You know, it's quite a simple process in the right hands. It doesn't need to be overly complicated. A simple asset verification process with some pretty basic asset management knowledge and skill set can actually get you to where you need to be to help transition into the world of decarbonisation. So asset management's number two. I think the last thing is around innovation. We are going to need to use new innovative tools, platforms, software solutions, artificial intelligence, all of these great buzzwords to help this journey. But I would really advocate every single customer should have an innovation framework before they start engaging with any platform provider. There's so much greenwash out there. There are so many false promises. There are so many claims of 20, 30, 40% savings from artificial intelligence turning things off. Every customer, including ourselves, needs a framework to decide how are we going to distill what this provider is offering us. How are we going to do our due diligence to make sure it's real and it works? How are we going to test it? And then how are we going to measure it moving forward? And how are we going to make sure we don't fall into the bear trap of shared savings schemes, you know, overestimated savings, and ultimately products that just don't work. So there is a space for innovation, but it should have the same due diligence every other kind of project has in the building sector. So that's it for me, really. Building operation and optimization, asset management, and innovation.
Okay, Chris, that's great. Thanks. Well, thank you. That's very important, and it's interesting looking at from sort of three key areas there, three core areas. Good. Okay. Now, looking at the Q&A at the moment, I can't see any Q&A coming in direct, but I'm happy to ask a few questions. Just take the role of the chair over, if that's okay. Interesting discussion about information and building owners and building users understanding what's required, what's available, what's possible, which leads me into an interesting debate. Actually, one thing specific is obviously there's the energy technology list that was reformed or is being reformed by the government. And I'm passionate, or we're passionate, Esther, about the end user engagement and making sure that end users, whatever type of end user that is, whether it's a facilities manager or an energy manager or even a finance director or the business itself direct. And I'm wondering whether anyone here feels that how do we get better information? And Chris is quite right when he says there are potentially things out there that are very misleading or could be misleading. People tempted to spend money on the promise and actually not really being fully aware of what they're buying. So really, I'm just interested in the views about the best methodology. Now, the energy technology list should be that best methodology because it should be that view of software product, making sure you're buying the right product, the right software, and getting something that works. That's got challenges at the moment. The software still isn't on the ETL, so that's not helping. But does anyone here have any views on how we best educate? Is it through facilities management groups? How do we best get the message out to end users to make sure they're getting the right solution? Any thoughts?
I guess what I would say is, we kind of got to fall back on our engineering skill set in the industry.
Right.
The organisations like ESTA and CIBSE, actually, the people associated to those sectors are experts in their field, aren't they? And I think they're the people that we need to be consulting with to make sure that this technology is right. And I think any kind of technology that's or solution that's not kind of backed up or kind of got some level of involvement from those groups perhaps should be avoided. But I think it's also worth, every customer needs an independent way of verifying these things. So we use something called measurement and verification, which enables us to track project efficiency, either at a very kind of ring fence level, so we can just test a single kind of solution, or at a whole building level. And I think it's those kind of tools that will be useful.
I agree. Yeah, that's very valid. Absolutely. I don't get me wrong. I don't think it's the energy technologist is not a good solution ultimately, and other the skill sets that ESTA members, CIBSE members, BESA members have already got. It's just methodology to make sure that the end users actually are aware. And I do mean direct end users in that sense, businesses who want to do the right thing, make sure they're doing the right thing. Okay. Another interesting question that's come out of that, and certainly something. Oh, in fact, I'm just looking through. We have got a couple of QAs from the audience. I'll just quickly ask the thing I was going to add. AI, artificial intelligence, very much relevant. I was getting bombarded with this discussion at the Smart Building Show recently. I really was interested to know whether does anyone here think that AI could ever take over from the human being ultimately in interpreting data? I suspect not, but perhaps not in my lifetime.
Well, I don't think it's ever going to take over, but it can certainly automate certain very, very difficult tasks. And if we're thinking about utilising renewables, that forecasting and fast reaction to changes in demand, and then intervening on the operation of fleets. So say, you had a fleet of flexible heat pumps that could either be paused or pulled in early to consume or to help shed some load off the grid. That's exactly the sort of thing that AI can help with, and actually the everyday type of controls that we all have in our homes and our buildings, they include AI. They have machine learning algorithms in them. So I think we've got to be advocates for technology as engineers, and don't be afraid of AI, but to utilize it in the right settings.
I'm just tempted not to rule out the human race somewhere having an interaction part to play in the whole energy efficiency debate.
Well, someone's got to code the AI. The AI
well, that's
it
true.
doesn't
Yes, at the
it
moment,
doesn't
yeah, it
code
hasn't learned how
itself.
to code
You know?
itself. No, not yet. It might do one day, but certainly not in my lifetime, or I doubt it. Okay, now I've got a couple of questions from the audience today. So a question from Neil Merritt, and I think this is very much directed at Ian's question, actually. What is the most realistic path to meet Ian's recommendation of ensuring heat, ventilation specialists, etc., have a better understanding of the different systems running across a whole building? So possibly an education piece in, and how do we get the different groups working better together, the different skill sets?
I think a lot of it comes down to is every building slightly different, and I think a building should have a plan or you get an O&M manual. So when a building is built and commissioned, and you look in there, there's kind of a story about how that building works, and those get diminished over time and they change because the building changes. And I think it all ultimately starts with every building or building owner should make some effort into recreating the story of how their building works, how the VRVs should be set. Sorry, I'm just on a. How the VRVs should be set, how the air conditioning set, how the air handler set, how the boiler works, and how it all works together, so the engineer can have a look at it. And I think that's probably one of the key things that's missing, because everybody just goes and looks at their own strand.
Okay, I mean, yes.
Sense.
Yes, I suppose it's, as you say, it's the whole skill sets of all the different facilities managers,
Yeah,
building services engineers, heating
the
engineers, plumbing
engineers don't
engineers,
need.
whatever you call them.
You don't need to know everything, but I think everybody needs to know how a building works, how it all operates and how it's been set to run. Because when a building's designed, somebody's designed it to work in a certain manner, and it gets changed over time by engineers that are changing things, changing set points. Then all of a sudden it's completely out of sync, but nobody actually knows. So, so the air handler's set to deliver air at 16 degrees. If you set it to 21, it's just not going to do it. The boilers are just going to run flat out. Things like that. If you set the temperature, it's only designed to achieve 21 to 23 degrees. So when you're setting it 25, it ain't going to do it. So it's just things like that to stop people from doing extreme set points. Every building needs a kind of a story to say how it should work at its best. Then everybody can check their bit to make sure it is working at its best.
Does anyone else out of interest have a view about the best way of bringing the sector more together in that sense of, the different component aspects of the sector? Anyone, any takers
Well,
from that?
I was brought up as a mechanical engineer, right? And over my 30-year career, I've learnt about all sorts of things. And the thing I've learnt about over the last few years is vapor compression technology and heat pumps. So I think as engineers, we've got to keep learning. There's no you go to tech for 5-7 years and then that's it. You stay in your box. We've all got to collaborate. We've all got to learn from each other. And that peer-to-peer learning, knowledge share is the only way that all this is going to intermesh and we're ever going to get to where we need to be. So continual learning, being part of your institution, using that network to, do your CPDs and stuff is really, essential for all engineers in the industry.
It brings
I
back
totally
some.
agree with that. Yeah, I've also been a big fan of buddying up, in between trades. I've been doing quite a few heat pumps lately, and I've not been shy in taking a plumber or heating engineer along with me as well. So you can buddy up and you can learn off each other. I'm not super confident on the water side. They're not super confident on the fridge side. You both come together and then you both explain to each other about what's going off, and you both come out of it. You both better off. So buddying up is a big thing, I think, that's overlooked.
It's intriguing as well because someone, and I'm not going to certainly name the person who said this to me, but during a discussion a few months ago, someone's made reference. I think, well, to be fair, he was in the facilities management sector. Not quite sure what level, but he did say to me, "Well, of course, Mervyn, us old codgers, and that's his term, not mine. The consultants are very good at putting the solutions in and the data and the technology in, but we're not necessarily all as good as we should be at understanding how that all works." Now, there's obviously a gap perhaps in facilities management training, and I've no doubt the IWFM and others are working on that. But it did sort of bring me back to that thought about how if there are people out there who don't understand outside of their very little narrow silos or their training or their engineering background, then that wouldn't help. to make the best use of that technology. Alex, general point. Another question in from Chris Ridge, which is a simple question, possibly in again, although I'm happy if anyone else wants to ask. It's a simple question. How about thermal insulation of valves and pipes as low-hanging fruit?
Absolutely.
Ian's nodding. Yeah,
I mean, you don't go and do many energy audits, and you don't specify increasing insulation of valves, flanges, pipework, etc. And I mean, paybacks can be less than a year quite regularly. So absolutely spot on, especially in boiler and plant rooms first and foremost.
It's the bane of my life as well, George. You go into a plant room, you see a great big buffer vessel, fully insulated beautifully, and then there's a big access hatch right in the middle, burning out heat. So yeah,
absolutely.
Valve jackets. I think every single survey, the kind of audit action, that's the first one.
And I can completely agree. And it's actually really hard to find technicians to do insulation properly, and get the right materials in the right places. I've experienced this myself recently with a heat pump retrofit we've had at our house. And we found that there was a big heat loss between the heat pump and in the pipes that were running along the wall. And what we found is that there's a 3% efficiency loss for every 1 degree that you lose in the parasitic losses. So it's really, really important to lag properly using the right materials and to get trained up how to do lagging properly, because it's one of those like art things, everyone thinks they can do it, and it's a really skilled piece actually, and often overlooked.
You touched on something quite important there as well. Sorry, with heat pumps in constant temperature, low temperature circuits as well, should I say? The importance of insulation is going to be ever more and more, not just from an energy efficiency perspective, but even just making sure those low temperature systems work and do their job.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I think we're coming up. We've got about just under 3 minutes left, so I think we've certainly covered the questions of the audiences or the audience members. Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered as much as we could probably cover in the half-hour slot. I think the message seems to me to be, look, back to basics is a good start, and I think there is almost a world of quite fantasy policy going on, probably a lot more in Glasgow than anywhere else at the moment, about all the wonderful technologies that are going to keep us flying, doing everything we want to do, as though nothing's got to change. Buildings are obviously a very important aspect. Commercial buildings are obviously much harder to deal with in many ways than the residential side. We've got ambition and hope, certainly that the energy technology list is sorted out soon. From a personal perspective, the accountant in me and the economist in me says we need some financial incentives from the government to help get some of these very long existing business energy efficiency solutions into the buildings to get that process underway. Hopefully some tax incentivization. But generally, I think the optimism is probably outweighing the cynicism in this group today, or the panel. I think the view is there's the technology there, it's doable, we can do it now. I think we need to be careful. We need to make sure the simple things like insulation, yes, is done. We don't necessarily just look, and we make sure we're not going out and buying as one of my colleagues said the other day, the snake oil salesman approach to energy efficiency, material equipment solutions. Yeah, make sure we're not buying that type of equipment. We're buying the right equipment and get it verified and get it checked and make sure it does its job well. It just remains me in the last minute or so just to say a big thank you to everyone who's taken part today. Really glad, and I think hopefully it's a good discussion to have and worth having. Very basic discussion about energy efficiency and how important that is in terms of all of the other solutions that are currently being discussed on the transition and other aspects of net zero. So, again, thanks to Ian, thanks to Chris, thanks to Rob, thanks to George for taking part today, and hope everyone's found some useful information and knowledge. Obviously, the audience generally should have all of this knowledge already, but it's good to always, I think, just touch base and make sure that everyone's up to date with where we are with energy efficiency. Look forward to carrying on the good work of the group, the special interest group between BESA and ESTA, and hopefully we'll be able to push forward some of those solutions, develop some positive research, and keep pressing forward to make sure our commercial buildings are as efficient as possible. Marvellous. Unusually for me as chair, I managed to get this timing almost perfect, so we've just got about 20 seconds left. But yeah, a massive thank you to everyone for taking part, and good luck and keep up the good work, all of you.